Hi, and welcome to Decoding AQ, helping you to learn the tools, mindsets, and actions to thrive in an ever-changing world. Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Decoding AQ. I have Renita Kalhorn with me from New York. I've been very excited to meet you and learn all about your experiences and thoughts. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
So Renita, you've worked with, as it says on your LinkedIn, 1,200 high performers across 40 different countries, from startup
Yes.
founders like myself to military special forces, which is not like myself. Essentially looking at how do they communicate, what is their emotional intelligence, what's their productivity under pressure, all around mental preparation. So I'm, really excited to dig in with you.
Cool. Cool.
So tell me a little bit of your background. You said you went to business school in Paris and you executive leadership, all of these things. Give us a little bit of the journey that you've
Sure.
been on. Bring it to life.
Yeah. Well, I started off life in a very linear way. So at the age of 5, I started playing the piano, and my dream was to be a concert pianist. So I was, practicing hours a day, entering competitions with the dream of coming or going to Juilliard, the Juilliard School here in New York. And that's what I did. I came to New York, and that's where the path just kind of diverged, and it went from becoming this linear path to kind of a game of pinball. So I decided not to pursue a career in music. And I'll just give you a quick highlight of the things, of the
That
dots
triggered it.
along the
Yeah.
way. So I graduated from Juilliard. I said, all right, I'm going to go to law school because I didn't really know what else to do. So I went to law school. The first year wasn't very enjoyable. So I left for a year. I went to Italy, and that was wonderful. But I said, all right, I need to go back. So I went back and I tried a dual MBA, JD program at the same school. That didn't work out so well. So I said, let me try something totally different. And it just kind of came to me, why don't I go to Japan? I really love living in foreign countries, and Japan was calling to me. So through a series of serendipitous events, I ended up in Japan for almost 7 years. In Japan, I heard about this business school called INSEAD in France. And I said, oh, that sounds like a good next step, seeing as how my education from Juilliard hadn't been that useful. I really was getting into business at that point. So I went to INSEAD thinking that I would stay in Europe. And when I graduated, I found out, oh, there weren't actually going to be a lot of job opportunities for someone with my job experience. So I ended up coming back to New York. And that's where I started working in .coms. So this was, the late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So I really kind of fell into that whole scene, and just kind of got a taste of this entrepreneurial environment where, we were trying to figure out what was the internet. How do you, get paid for things on the internet? So it was really kind of an exciting time. And so along the way now, when I look back, I see how I was developing this muscle of just learning to be adaptable and resilient, and kind of like be surveying the landscape. Oh, that looks interesting. Let me try that. Oh, I didn't expect that to happen. And then just bouncing back and just really like a muscle, developing it. So at some point I just realized, I think my skills would be better used as a coach. I saw that coaching was becoming this viable profession. And so I jumped into that, or I actually got nudged a little bit by getting laid off. So I jumped, and I have been doing it ever since.
It's interesting, isn't it, when we tell ourselves the stories of what dots we remember to make it make sense, right? Between intention, a dream, a goal, serendipity, opportunity, and then when we meet people, experience new things, we see new things, and we get intrigued, and that it's this balance of curiosity, and then does it repel us or does it attract us? And I guess that is all what we're on. This many pages and chapters of discovery of our
Totally.
lives. Tell me a bit more about Japan. What made you go there? What did you do when you were there?
like I said, it was just something that popped into my head. My mother is Asian. She was Korean, but at the time, Japan was this big super power. And so I thought, if I learn Japanese, this could be a really useful skill. And so it happened that my father was working with a Japanese person. And so they said, you can live with us. So I had a
The
place to live when
opportunity
I
presented
landed.
itself.
It
Yeah.
presented itself. And at the time, I don't remember having a lot of fear or anxiety. I think it was more like, I don't want to be in law school. So what could be worse than law school, basically?
I think that could be a good quote for some lawyers. What could be worse than law school? It's like a Dr. Pepper. So in terms of then...
So that's when things started to become very magical.
This kind of balance of curiosity, of going and learning and experiencing things, going to different schools, from music to law into coaching. Was there a period between, the idea of coaching and then finding how you show up in coaching, in terms of working with special forces, working very much in mental toughness? What were the triggers for that journey for you?
Yeah, it's been an evolution. There was no way I could just say, I'm going to start, my coaching practice, and here's exactly what I'm going to do. Just looking back now, I can see how the dots connected. But at the time, I started out as like sort of this generic all-purpose coach. I was trying to figure out what I was doing. And so about 9-10 years ago, again, serendipitously, I met a retired Navy SEAL captain who runs a very reputable organization that trains civilians to become Navy SEALs. So basically, they're training Navy SEAL candidates. And so I've been there for the last 9 years, providing the mental toughness piece, because I reached out to him and I said, I know that you're doing a lot of physical fitness preparation. And I also understand that psychologists are seeing that a big factor in the success of Navy SEAL candidates is that mental toughness piece. Are you doing anything to train that mental toughness? And he said, no. And I said, oh, well, maybe I can help. And so that's what I've been doing now, is really bringing a systematic way to help civilians prepare for the rigor of Navy SEAL life.
And was that always, a balance of what they were doing in Navy SEAL training? Because in my mind, it's such the focus of physical and the physicality of it. And the majority, as I understand, are groomed from within the military as opposed to from civilian side. So is that right? What was the kind of routine, and does that play, do you think, an unexpected role for them, of how big the impact is of your mental toughness and the mental preparation needed for that kind of activity?
Yeah, so a lot of the candidates show up for training and they don't really know what to expect. So a lot of that is just the shock. It's hard to be resilient when you have no idea what's going to happen. And just the sheer intensity of it is just overwhelming. So what we do for the candidates is we put them in as many simulated situations as we can, whether it's running a full-size obstacle course, whether it's doing the log PT, where you're carrying big logs with a team of guys. And I'm there through all the exercises, identifying the mental components that they could be practicing as they're practicing the physical. So the physical exercise is like a vehicle to develop the mental side. And things are evolving in the military as well, but they don't do a lot of mental training, at least they're not doing that to help you get in. In the beginning, it's just a culling process. You need to be mentally tough on your own in order to get through. And then once you're in, they'll give you support.
And I guess it's that kind of, expectation of whatever the role is that we're doing, whatever our career is, the mental side is often left. It's the hard skills that this is the prerequisite, and the other stuff, you take care of that. It's not the responsibility of perhaps the organization to provide the environment for peak performance mentally. And I remember watching a few interviews of David Goggins, you know, and his backstory of this, you know, the world's toughest man. And it was fascinating to just learn about the mental resilience and adversity he's had to overcome in his own life. That all of that was the preparation to achieve some amazing achievements. What would you say the sort of balance is between the physical and mental side to deal with, you know, very difficult situations? How would you describe how they correlate, what we could learn from that, where many are finding themselves in unknown circumstances, and this balance between physical breathing, you know, work and mental work? What's your view on that?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I think that is the question, that finding that balance in any given moment, because it's not a fixed, oh, it should be a 40-60 ratio or an 80-20. No, it's something that you need to be constantly evaluating. And so there are some people who spend too much time in reflection and not enough time in action, and then vice versa. So we're all here in physical bodies. I don't think we're meant to just sit on the couch and reflect and meditate all the time. But when we do meditate, when we do ground ourselves, then when we take action, the results tend to be much better. So it's not a clear answer that I could give. It's more, this is the framework in how to think about that balance. And that's what you actually have to train, is figuring out that balance for you, yourself, and your team.
And I guess what you were talking about of these simulations, we can envisage certain physical simulations that you might be faced in a given situation. So, you might have to carry something heavy. The terrain might be bad. You might have these kind of obstacles. And so we can create those scenarios in which to practice and prepare. How do you do that on a mental side to create the scenarios without it being real? Because I guess what I'm trying to say is the difference between the scenario of carrying a physical object over a terrain in practice to real is quite similar. Let me give you a scenario where the person that you've come to love next to you is now dead. Let me prepare that scenario of how you're going to deal with that, or whatever other mental challenges we might face. How do you simulate mental challenges?
Oh, interesting you asked that, because I am now very much focused on finding ways to simulate. So doing more role play. Now, the example you gave, you can't simulate
is extreme.
that.
Yeah.
It's extreme. But let's start with something less extreme, like a difficult conversation where you have to deal with someone who's demonstrating toxic behaviors, or an underperformer, or, you know, things just aren't going well with a co-founder, or, you know, any of those emotionally driven conversations that we have in our life. Most people are jumping into action. Either they're paralyzed thinking about that conversation they don't want to have, or they're jumping into action to just be doing something. And I personally believe that we could be simulating, role-playing a lot more of that, so that you feel how uncomfortable it is in a safe environment. So I actually provide a training ground for my clients to practice these conversations where it's safe, where they could, you know, interrupt a pattern that they normally have. They could try something different. They could try being vulnerable. They could try all these leadership concepts that are scary in real life, because if they don't go well, then there are consequences. And so I guess what I would like to say is, let's find ways to simulate. Let's be creative in how to simulate some of these emotional situations, instead of, you know, just thinking, oh, you can't.
Yeah. And it reminds me of a comment and a sort of practice that Chris Voss, the FBI hostage negotiator guy, I've never split the difference, of talking about the low risk repetitions. So, you know, like finding the moments where you can practice something that's uncomfortable and in a low risk situation. So I guess that's similar to a simulation is, let's find a low risk version so that you can practice uncomfortable conversation, and you're building that muscle, you know, and so that when you're in uncomfortable situations, it's not unfamiliar. And I guess that's part of it, I
Right.
guess.
Just to add on to that, that
Yeah.
feeling of being uncomfortable is familiar. So what I've found is that people feel sort of betrayed by their bodies when they get into a situation. There's all these emotions. Now their mouth is dry, their hands are shaking. They said something that they didn't plan to say. And so they feel like, oh, I'm not in control. And that's what really throws people off, is when they don't feel like they're in control. So if you go into a situation that you practice 10 times and you know, oh yeah, it feels really uncomfortable, you at least feel a sense of control, because it's like, oh yeah, I know how this feels. I know why my hands are really sweaty. I know why my mouth is dry. I'll have water, right? So you just feel more in control, which is really what anybody needs.
Yeah, it's interesting because, sometimes it's not about getting to the point where your palms are never sweaty. It's just not being thrown off when they get sweaty.
Exactly. I think that's the point. People want to reach that point where their hands won't be sweaty, and that's never going to happen unless you do spend your life on the couch.
Yeah. If you're constantly driving into growth, into things that are unfamiliar, they're going to be sweaty. But, knowing how to deal with it, have the things around you, whatever those tools might be. So in that, scenario and analogy, it might be the chalk that you put on. So in the mental bit, it might be the breathing exercise, the using the pauses, all of these different things are your chalk for the sweaty palms. But in the mental arena, in terms of, so this balance between working in the extreme situations of Navy SEALs and military, and then equally extreme of the world of entrepreneurs figuring it out as they go along, where do you see great performance in terms of preparing people for this world we find ourselves in, which is hyper complex, so uncertain, really the pace of change is accelerating? Who's preparing well? What have you seen, and what could we learn from that?
Yeah, so I think if I had to just sort of give an umbrella meta skill that people need to learn for this next era, it's the ability to not know, to be in a state of not knowing, because that's antithetical to our survival instinct, which is to have certainty, to know what's going to happen, even if it's a negative thing. And so leaders need to develop that ability to be in ambiguity, in uncertainty, in complexity, to not know the answer, and to be able to stay there instead of rushing to try and find an answer, just to have that psychological relief of having an answer.
And that's human nature, isn't it? Right? We want closure, we want things to finish, and we want answers. You pop a question, the brain wants to answer it. And so it's so unfamiliar for us to be comfortable in that situation. What are some of the perhaps tips or techniques, or what you've seen certain teams or organizations do to create the environment or to create the roadmap to where that might even be possible for people to exist in that kind of world?
I would say the key communication skill for leaders is to be able to create context. Is to be able to zoom out, see the big picture, identify what's relevant in this moment, or what's relevant to this team or to this person, and be able to speak with real precision and context, to create context for people. And then anything can happen. Then you can say, you know what, I don't know the answers, but here's what I do know, or here's what we're going to do until we get more information. And it just gives you that space to explore more, to be a little vulnerable, to be curious, because you've created the context and people have a general sense of where they're going. So the best leaders who are able to do that, they take time to reflect. So I'm always impressed when I speak to someone, they don't necessarily answer right away. They think in the moment. They're also taking time during their day to reflect, to look back at how they handled situations and figure out what they can do differently. And then just really helping everybody else around them to develop that habit. If you've got everybody reflecting, everybody creating context, now the whole level of operation has just been elevated.
I think that's a beautiful way of talking about it. And it's one that for many of the listeners who've heard me before talk about co-elevation, everybody
Oh,
elevating. And
yes.
this situation, and it's a Keith Ferrazzi, another sort of team coach, talks about as well, and I heard it from him and it just went, wow, yeah, that's it, co-elevation. All boats rise in the tide in the harbor, and that's the sort of environment we want to create as leaders. And just to reflect, or to come back to your contextualization,
Sure.
is I think one of the other sort of layers to that is just how often we have to recontextualize. Because when the landscape is shifting so regularly, we might have contextualized at the beginning of the year. Many companies go, this is our focus for the year. Well, I know from firsthand, my contextualizing skills that I did in January and set the course for everybody on the planet, a few months later, the context that we set, the entire landscape shifted. And so for every piece of technology, every sector, every area, the cadence and period at which we need to contextualize is now more regular. And I think that takes bravery to say what was before is no longer existing. We have to say, accept it. Yeah. And I think that's another skill, isn't it? Is to accept
that radical
change,
acceptance,
of those bits. In terms of, within your organization and what you do, you work in, as you said, with the Navy SEAL and the organization of preparing civilians to go in, to working with entrepreneurs and various other areas. How has your organization shifted over the years, and where do you see it going over the next few years in terms of what your focus is and how you're preparing for these accelerated changes? What are you involved in and doing?
Oh, it's been constant evolution. And so just to add on to your point, because of the I think we need to be shortening the time periods that we're planning for. I think that daily reflection, so that's a habit that I really have been working on incorporating, because that's when you can start to notice the tiny little details. I think we need to get better at observing tiny differences, tiny, progress, instead of waiting for a whole quarter, instead of waiting for a whole year. So really time needs to be compressed in a way in how we're shifting with it. So that's something I've been able to develop in my organization, because it's been very lean. I've always had contractors. I haven't had any full-time employees. And so when I see a different direction that I want to go in, I can be very agile, very nimble.
You've got no legacy, you've got no baggage, you can move.
No legacy.
Yeah.
I look at some of the old ways I used to do things. I just let those go. But what I am moving more towards this group model, because I'm seeing the power of the group to work together in terms of developing self-mastery, self-awareness. And it's a way for me to scale my impact, because one-on-one, there's a limit to how much I can help people. But with the group model, that's very scalable. So I would say that's the key piece that I've been focusing on in the last few years, which has really been helped by technology. Now that we have Zoom, video that is actually, robust. So everything is kind of coming together in terms of technology, just the global nature of people, able to meet together in groups online. So that's where I'm right now.
Some of the challenges that you've helped people, say, in the last 6 months deal with, what's it been like on the ground? Because you're right in the heart of a very challenging area geographically. You're in New York. There's been such shift of what's had to close. We were talking just before we hit record about the innovations of restaurants now being allowed to have open air, seating outside that they've been wanting for years, but never been able to get. Now they can. Where have you been working in a story where an organization or a person has had to radically adapt and what challenge did they face? How did they overcome it? Tell us a story about someone that you supported through that transition and change in the last 6 months.
I think what I am seeing is that until the beginning of this year, we had all the forces in place, and I just kind of had this vision in my head of, this train barely hanging on the tracks, where they were still on the tracks, but it was close. The margin of error was very slim. And now with everything that's going on, the pandemic, the social unrest, the politics, that train is about to fly off the tracks. And so I'm seeing that people are understanding, okay, I can't just keep on doing business as usual. Doing myself as usual is what it really is. And so I'm seeing this shift where they're like, okay, I do need to get help. I do need to change these behaviors that aren't serving me or my organization. And so I've just seen that's sort of a tipping point where leaders are coming to me, owners are saying, okay, I need to do things differently. What is that? How do I do that? So for example, overwhelm. Many entrepreneurs were dealing with overwhelm before the pandemic, but somehow they were making it work.
On the edge of the track.
They
were still connected. Yep.
And then along came all these forces that made them realize that that's just not going to work. I do need tools. And so that's what I've been doing with my program, is actually teaching them concrete tools that they can use every day, in their interactions with people, to manage themselves and to have more influence in their interactions.
So I've got let's say a really important conversation coming up with a potential partner for the business. And it's an area where it's key part of our plan and strategy. We're looking to take our platform and get distributors in different countries. Cool. And then finding the distributors that are mindset aligned, believe in adaptability, want to do all of these sorts of things. And yet perhaps they're a bit more traditional in the way in which the environment takes place. So we're doing it inside an AI chatbot. We're embracing technology very differently to what the norm is. And we know inside our little system that the level of science, the level of rigor is way beyond what the traditional and current is. Yet because it's unfamiliar and it's not done in the way that it's always been done before, they might have a little bit of trepidation to it. What tips could you give me for having those kinds of conversations? And I guess for anyone listening, it's this barrier of innovation, right? You've got something that's a different way of doing it. The person you're trying to speak to has a different view of, how to solve it or what the technology is or isn't. How do you have those conversations? What would be some tips, some advice that you could give me or people in a similar situation where that is there?
So I would give you a framework, actually. And first of all, the understanding that everything is biology. We really need to understand how much we're driven by our survival mechanism, those instincts. And so I've come up with a methodology to identify key survival triggers based in neuroscience. So you may be familiar with these. I call it the FAST triggers. So F is future, or uncertainty. A is autonomy, knowing, am I in control? S is status. What's my standing vis-a-vis this person or this group? T is tribe. Do I belong? Do I feel trust? Is this fair? And then there's a second T, which is time. So I'm sure just hearing those triggers, you can realize, oh, those are happening all the time. And so what I do with my clients is I help them really just internalize what these triggers are. And then first of all, identify how you yourself might be triggered. And actually lead them through what I call a FAST map, to map out the triggers. First for yourself, to understand, oh, I might be triggered when this person says, well, we can't do it that way, or we've always done it this way. Whatever it might be, imagining this conversation, right? Just work through each trigger. And then do the same for the other party, or as many parties are involved. And now you have taken out of your head and your body onto paper what are some of the little, what do you call them, in a minefield, you know, that the trip fall, where you get triggered. You get triggered or they get triggered, and now you can prepare. You can understand, wow, they probably have a huge future trigger. If you talk about anything that feels uncertain to them, they are going to put on the brakes. Or maybe there's some status, right? Is there a huge established company that's been around for years? They've always done it this way. Who are you, this young upstart entrepreneur, to tell them to do it differently? Tribe, they might, you know, if there's an age difference or a technical, you know, facility difference. So you're just really raising your level of awareness of what's going on between you that's probably unspoken, and coming out in sort of emotional reactions. And by doing that, now you can prepare with the fast rewards, because we are looking for threats and we're looking for rewards in our environment. So how can you raise their status? How can you create autonomy for them, or create a sense of trust in all this uncertainty?
I find that really interesting in terms of, so we reflect to gain awareness and plan with it. And then would you, when you come up with these things and you're having these conversations, would you call them out? Would you say, in this future situation, I guess you might be feeling a bit anxious about this because of X, Y, and Z, because it's unfamiliar and it's not a technology that you've perhaps implemented before. Let's talk about it. Or would you try and mitigate it by presenting what you think is the solution to what the issue is that you've manifested in your mind? You know, what's the sort of balance between, do you manifest, solve it, and then go straight in with, and here's all the social proof and evidence, and you might have not even hit that was the right issue.
Exactly.
So how do you practically approach that?
So thank you. You're giving me a chance to clarify. You're not doing this to come up with the answer. Remember, you're not trying to know the answer. You're just coming up with hypotheses. So based on what I know so far, here's what I think might be a trigger for them. If that's a trigger, then how might I respond? How might I mitigate that trigger? And so you're using a lot of Chris Voss's techniques. You might be saying, it sounds like you really want to hang on to this software, or
this
whatever it is.
Tactical empathy.
Tactical empathy, exactly. But instead of you being triggered and you're like, I can't believe he said that, I'm coming back with, you know, trying to be, you're either trying to persuade or
why don't you see it this way? This is going to be so much better for you.
Yes. So the key thing that I see, the mistake that I see people making, is that they try to be rational in an emotional conversation.
Wow.
I see this with the SEALs. Like I say that they're too mission driven. And entrepreneurs are like, what do you mean too mission driven? We need to get to that mission. And sometimes the fastest way to complete the mission is not from point A to point B. It is to have that tactical empathy, to be curious, to get more information, to slow down, to speed up, right? So I just want to be very clear. This map is not about coming up with the answers. It's just kind of being more aware of, just like with minefields, right? You don't know exactly where the minefields are. You just have a general sense. And now you can be a little more prepared.
And even just having the conversation about there's some minefields in here might be the only solution that's required, is to talk about the fact that there's minefields there, to say, hey, let's not go in the minefield. Rather than thinking about, what's all these tools, all these things that we've got to do, and we've got to plot exactly where they are and what our route is. And somebody just looks and says, I'm glad you told me there was minefields there. I'm going over there. and completely.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Wouldn't it? It reminded me of one of my favorite little video sketches. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's called "It's Not About the Nail."
Oh,
have you seen it? And for those of you who haven't seen it, look it up. It's not about the nail, and it's a conversation between a man and a woman. And she's got a nail in her forehead, and all the man wants to do is pull the nail out, right? He wants to solve it. He sees the problem and he wants to solve it. And all the lady wants is just to be, listened to, that, she has this challenge. And, it's a very comically done sketch,
well
she talks
done,
about, but all my jumpers, they have all these holes in it. They keep getting snagged, and it's like, you can't wait to, no, you've got a nail in your foot. No, it's not about the nail. Anyway, I just had visions of that when, this balance between wanting to jump to a solution. We're hardwired to solve it. And I guess in uncertainty, it's, the solutions are so challenging and so different and so difficult that the old way of dealing with overwhelm was to tick things off, to get the solutions, to do all of those. But when you have an ever increasing to-do list, how do you deal in overwhelm in that kind of situation? And I guess these are exactly where you work, in terms of.
Or what about a problem that can't be ticked off? Because it's an ongoing problem. It's this balance that you need to keep evaluating. That's very psychologically uncomfortable. We just want to tick it off and never have to think about it again. One and done. And that world is fading quickly.
I guess it's why I like gardening so much. I can go out and I can go, yep, there used to be leaves all over there. Now there's no leaves.
Right. That's very satisfying.
I guess, it's finding a bit like the low risk repetitions of scenario for our mental stuff, is finding the opportunities where we can get those little fixes to be able to then go into areas where it's never going to be done. It's an ongoing, and be cool with that, but find the little boost to energize and give us vitality to face another day with joy rather than with sadness of those things.
Yeah, I would, highly recommend that people have some kind of extracurricular activity that's very physical, whether it's, repairing something. Sometimes I envy motorcycle repair people because it's so concrete. This wasn't working, now it's working. Or like you said, gardening, right? There were weeds there, now there are no weeds. But I also, what I do with clients or recommend is that they make things as physical as possible. They concretize all this mental activity, whether it's writing, taking physical notes in a notebook, or having index cards with reminders on them. Anything you can do to make your life more physical. Because now, even with the pandemic, we're not even meeting with people in real life. They're just this head on a screen.
Yeah, they're just avatars.
So we need to consciously look for ways to make things more physical and concrete, because that's when we get into trouble, is when we get caught up in our head. Right? We're just going around in this loop with the illusion that we'll be able to figure out the solution. And you're not going to be able to figure anything out until you get it out of your head.
Get it out. I think that's a really great tip. And that for me, I had a big shift quite a long time ago in terms of my note taking. So I used to, you have all these great conversations, in my business I ran before, and I'd have countless conversations where you're taking notes, right? And I'd be scribbling it furiously down to make sure I never missed anything. And then technology came along, and it was these echo pens that allowed you to record the audio while you were writing, and you could refer back to it, and all of these things. And I was so focused on not missing anything that I never got anything, if that made sense.
Wow.
Right? And so
that's a great
I shifted my note taking, that my note taking was then going to be a joyful experience. And I think to your music and piano, and some people play the piano to get every note right and to do all the lessons, and others, it's just the joy of playing the piano. And my note taking made that same shift, in that my note taking became a joyful exercise. They just happened to be notes. And, just that permission and shift for me, then, I've got to get these notes down. I've got to get everything there. And it's a blooming mess. And I hated them, to now it's a joy of activity. And I get a lot of people now commenting, and I found my happy place. I use the iPad with the pencil, because it's sort of this nice combination between a physical holding a pen and writing it, and still digital, that, I'm not carrying around traipse of big notebooks. But I'm quite particular. I'm quite precise. I like the writing and the exercise of that. And that's part of what you're talking about, is to reflect, to write it, to make it physical. I think that's important in a digital world, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're helping me make this point that I'm realizing it's like peeling an onion. I'm realizing it more and more. It's not what we do, it's how we do it.
Yeah,
It's how we think
really
about
is.
what we do. Because if you think about it, our work is always just going to be what? Writing emails, talking to people,
Yeah, the higher up we
right?
go, it's more spreadsheets and emails, you know.
But yeah, it's a very limited
Yeah,
realm of activity.
yeah.
And so it's the spirit that we bring to it, because I can sit at the
Yes.
piano and be like, oh, this sounds awful, or I can sit at the piano and feel like a channel where I'm channeling some
Yeah.
energy into my fingers and you know, trying to express what's coming through me.
And I
And
guess
you know, getting a little metaphysical, but I feel like if we can do that, just be that conduit for the energy, then that can transform anything.
it can. And I guess it's this balance between the thought of the fuzzy, the emotional, and the real, and the getting the tasks and getting them done. And why do they have to be opposed to each other? Why do they have to be in conflict?
Mm.
And I'm still, you know, an eternal student of, oh, I've got to get this done. I've got to get the result. I'm in a results economy, and I go on the next call. Oh, no, oh yeah, I've got a podcast to prepare for, and just going, how am I going to have fun? How am I going to make them smile? You know, what is actually going to be the, you know, joy of it, irrelevant of what comes out the other end? Because if you have fun and
Yeah.
enjoy it, it will show up as value. And the confidence to, when we're facing a task, whether it's about our resilience or an experiment, or even to cultivate our hope, to have joy in all of those things, you know, it is a choice. And
Yes.
it's when there is a lot of fear, we tend to, as you know, you talked about this neuroscience and this aspect of how we're responding, what is it, and we got to hold on to things, and that immune system comes up in protection mode, that you're not released that inner child of just the relax. And
Mm.
I'm interested in your breathing. Tell me a little bit about the breathing work that you do. I've spoken to a lot of people about it, and I've never figured out one that was really resonated with me yet, from the difference of, oh, I need to breathe to live, versus, no, I'm breathing to enjoy the breathing and prepare me for a better
Mm.
performance. How do you work with people around breathing?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I think such a large percentage of us are walking around not breathing
Yeah.
well during the day. What I have found is when I want to practice breathing, it's hard. Like I
Yeah.
literally have this resistance to taking those deep breaths. I think that's the function of survival. The survival mechanism doesn't want us to be taking deep breaths and relaxing into openness. So I think for me, that's the first key, is understanding it's not going to feel comfortable to take deep breaths. You know, we have this idea, oh, if I take deep breaths, it's going to be so relaxing, but there's still that resistance in the beginning. And so what I'm doing, it's in my meditation. What I find is I start meditating, and then just sort of gradually, spontaneously, as I get deeper, as my mind becomes maybe quieter, then the breathing just starts to, I feel like I'm being breathed. The breath is just coming through me, and that's the best. When I just feel like, okay, now I'm not trying to control anything. I am just part of the flow. I am being breathed by life.
I am being breathed. I like that. I It just gave me a very random thought about how can we have this play between the physical and our spaces and our environments. And I had a vision of mistletoe, you know, at Christmas time here, where, oh, under the mistletoe you kiss somebody. That, do we segment a physical place for where we do the breathing, you know, just somewhere?
Mm.
And I just had a thought that, you know, oh, I go to the toilet, or I clean my teeth, or these various things. Where do I create a little moment, a little environment that's, as I pass through that, I am breathing, you know, I be breathing. And maybe if we can find these
That's,
little,
yes. I mean, I'll do it when I'm washing the dishes.
yeah, of just, oh yeah,
Anything like that. Cleaning, washing the
this
dishes.
is my breathing. And yeah, I it's one of the things I'm working to be better at. You know, I'm on the go. I've just actually taken, for the first time, a long weekend. You had Labor Day on
Mm.
Monday. I took Friday and Monday off, and with my co-founder, we went to Snowdonia in Wales and climbed the highest peak
Wow.
in Wales. And I'm struggling to walk today. You know, it's like, oh, you go for R&R, some rest and recovery, and it's like, I need some time after that. But, you know, I noticed in doing that, was I on the mission of getting up and down? Or was I actually looking around? Was I seeing the scenery? Was I breathing? Or was I just getting it done because I said I was going to do it? And I think in work, in our careers, with every task, with every Zoom call, are we breathing in it? Are we
So,
taking it in?
you know, I just finished Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And
Yeah.
where he was making the point between the experiencing self and the remembering self. And so what you just said is exactly what it is. Am I doing this so that I can say I did it, which is the remembering self? Or am I really trying to experience it, squeeze out, you know, the full experience of it? I think they did a research study where they asked people, if you went on this trip to climb, you know, Mount Kilimanjaro, but you couldn't take any pictures or tell people about it, would you still want to do it? And they didn't. They didn't actually want the experience. They just wanted to be able to talk about it. And I think that's a really useful distinction for us in our life. Do you want a life that you can just feel good about? Or do you want a life that actually you are experiencing it in the moment, whether you remember it or not?
That is profound, isn't it? And we've created a society and world where, you know, we're so wrapped up in the stories we tell ourselves, others, and that we're, you know, putting in our toolkit and in our, you know, each page of our chapters of our book, these experiences to tell the story, or are they just going in there because they're going in there?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I've heard of people who are active on social media who are in a conversation already thinking about how they're going to frame it on social media. Yeah. So we've actually created tools to perpetuate this tendency.
Yeah. Wonderful. So, final bits to wrap up. We're in this situation where many people naturally evolve and adapt, and they've built up this muscle, like you talked about, that your career has been iterative, it's been reflective, some serendipity, some intentional, but you now have these tools, these skill sets, both physically and mentally, to deal with uncertainty, to deal with unfamiliar, and you work with people to help them in that. Many, they've come into this room that it used to look a certain way, the furniture was laid out in a certain way, and now suddenly everything has changed for them. Give them some tips with how they might orientate themselves, for the fact that every time they come back into that room, the furniture is going to be different. The decoration is going to be different every single time. How might somebody get comfortable in that situation from all that we've talked about? If there was a lasting impression that people are taking away from our conversation, what would you want that to be?
Yeah, I can give one very simple, actionable tip, which I can't prove that it has worked for me, but I know it has. And that is what we need to do is interrupt autopilot, because autopilot is running 95% of the time. And so we walk into a room, we expect it to be a certain way, and when it's not, we're, just so thrown off. And so my theory is that if we can intentionally start to interrupt our autopilot, so instead of reacting, instead of involuntarily having change thrust upon us, if we are proactively changing things in a very incremental way. So it could be, in my case, I just wash the dishes with my left hand instead of my dominant right hand. Brushing your teeth, eating, right? If you just find a way to interrupt that autopilot, and it's going to feel uncomfortable and you're going to forget. But what I have found in a very imperceptible, but I am sure of it,
just wisdom.
Is that what
you know it.
Just know it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that it has opened me up to see things differently, to take opportunities, to do things that I normally wouldn't have done. And I just feel a sense of control in uncertainty.
Yeah.
Because I've sort of habituated myself to that very small discomfort of doing things differently than I normally do. And so most people, they wait until change is thrust upon them. They have trauma or tragedy or a global pandemic. And then you feel out of control. in the beginning. Why not feel a sense of control and know that no matter what gets thrown at you, you'll be able to handle it because you've been developing that muscle, both literally physical.
Yeah.
I'm pretty good at washing my hands now with my left hand, and mental, just managing that discomfort.
I love that phrase of interrupt autopilot intentionally and do it in a way that, you know, everything in from this extreme silliness to another practical way that you're experimenting because it might improve whatever it is just to have the joy of interrupting your autopilot, finding creative ways to do things differently. I think that's
exactly.
a very simple, practical thing that all of us can do, right? We can, right now, what would we have normally done at the end of this piece? Do it differently, you know, find a different route, find a different way of doing things, and you get good at spotting it. But like you said, it builds this confidence to deal with the unknown. And that's, I think, a great gift for our era, is to equip society and people with the confidence. It is. It 100% is. We're so aligned in our, you know, our thinking of, for me, adaptability is having confidence in the unknown. And how do you respond to those things? All of that great stuff. People want to get in touch with you, Renita. What's the best way of doing that if they've been, you know, fired up to learn more and want to understand a bit more and dig a bit deeper? How do they contact?
Thank you. Yeah, I would say find me on LinkedIn. That's pretty much where I'm spending a lot of time. I'll post all my writing there. I write daily posts where I highlight, you know, mindset shifts that you can consider. So find me on LinkedIn, Renita Kalhorn.
Brilliant. Thank you. It's been really joyful. I've leaned in to this, and my pursuit is that everyone I do to do a little bit better than before, do it in a different way. Whilst there's some structure, go where the energy goes. And you've been a real delight.
I loved it. It was great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Do you have the level of adaptability to survive and thrive the rapid changes ahead? Has your resilience got more comeback than a yo-yo? Do you have the ability to unlearn in order to reskill, upskill and break through? Find out today and uncover your adaptability profile and score, your AQ. Visit AQai.io to gain your personalized report across 15 scientifically validated dimensions of adaptability. For a limited time, enter code PODCAST65 for a complimentary AQME assessment. AQai, transforming the way people, teams, and organizations navigate change. Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding AQ. Please make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast directory, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a review and be sure to tune in next time for more insights from our amazing guests.